Okay, welcome to Module 5 for SPED 780. This week we're going to really take a look at co-teaching and co-planning and what that looks like. I think the chapter in the book, Chapter 5, really lays out some great resources that you can use if you're in a situation where you're co-teaching or co-planning, and really defines what the different roles are and the different ways that co-teaching can be applied in the classroom. So we're going to take a look at some of that in this video, take a look at some of the details from that, and then look at some examples that are out there. One of the things I think is important to kind of wrap our heads around is what are the different teacher strengths when we're co-teaching. Okay, we've got a regular education teacher in this setting, and we've got a special education teacher in what we're looking at in terms of co-teaching. And so each of those experts really come to the co-teaching experience with lots of tools and different tool sets really because of their training, because of their experience. So when we look at what the regular education teacher's experiences are, especially in the secondary classroom, is they're the content expert, right? They've had more extensive training on that content specifically, and also probably more familiar with the standards related to that content. So that's really where their expertise lies. The other area of expertise that they have that is important when we talk about co-planning is understanding the sequencing of instruction. So for example, if we're looking at a math class and we're co-planning with a special education teacher, there's a real sequence to of instruction for those math skills, and that's where that regular education teacher that has that degree in math really has a strength, is in that sequencing of the instruction. So when we look at co-planning, it's important to be aware of that and let sometimes the regular education teacher take the lead in that planning as they see the sequencing of instruction laid out. Now the special education teacher has their own unique strengths that the text talks about, and I think this is also really important to keep in mind when we're co-planning and co-teaching, right? As special educators, we have expertise in modifying instruction, right? Modifying instruction by content area, which is one of the things we're getting ready to really focus on in this class. So really taking a look at, okay, I've got a social studies class, this is the curriculum. These are the kind of barriers maybe to learning that some of these students are facing. So how can I modify the instruction? That's where your strength is as a special educator. Also identifying those individual learning needs that students have. So really identifying where maybe the strengths and weaknesses are in their learning and identifying tools that are going to address that, okay? The other piece that the text really talks about is really knowing those inclusion strategies. So how do we help students be successful in the general ed classroom when they have a deficit in their learning or maybe a deficit in their prior knowledge? And so that's where that special education teacher really comes in and plays a critical role in that co-planning, is helping each student be active in the learning process. So I think this is important for us to remember in terms of seeing kind of where we fit as special educators in the co-planning process and then where regular education fits. And it really helps us understand how that co-planning process can work along with some of the tools that we saw in the text. The textbook talks about 5 different models for co-teaching. And hopefully you're familiar with these. You've probably participated in some of these, if not all of them, okay, during your teaching experience or your classroom experience. So I like how this graph lays it out, because it lays it out in terms of if one teacher has responsibility all the way down to where we're really equally sharing responsibility for the classroom and how the different models fit in that. So if we take a look at one teaches, one observes, okay? That's where one teacher has the primary responsibility of teaching the content. One's just there observing, ensuring that students are participating, okay? Then as we kind of move across the spectrum, we've got one teaches and one drifts. And so here we're talking about one is teaching and one is providing support. This is a pretty common way of co-teaching that we see, especially in the secondary classroom, right? And so we've got a lead teacher and a support teacher. Lead and support is kind of what they talk about in the text as an example of this. You can rotate that lead teacher role. Okay, so maybe the regular ed teacher is the lead teacher for particular lessons, and then the special ed teacher is the lead teacher, and the regular ed teacher is the one that's drifting from student to student ensuring understanding, helping as they run into some kind of roadblock in their learning. And then we have parallel teaching. So this is really where we have subgroups of students in the classroom, and each teacher is teaching at the same time. And we can really create those subgroups in a variety of ways. We can do it in terms of learner types, so maybe what kind of learning style they have, right? And pair those groups. We can do it following the UDL principles. So let's say we've got a group that needs the content represented in text form and reading form, and then we've got a group that needs it more in visual video form. We can separate those two groups out, and each teacher take a group and lead in the way that the learner learns best. Okay, so parallel teaching is a pretty effective way of doing it. It still requires that co-planning though, where we're really looking at what are the goals for that group and how are we going to sequence instruction to reach those goals. Okay. Then we have alternative teaching, and this is probably also another somewhat common form of teaching that we see in inclusion. This is where we've got teaching occurring with the general classroom, right? And then we may have a small group of students towards the back of the room, the side of the room, somewhere within that classroom that are learning and kind of have some complementary teaching going on, okay? The important thing that I loved that the book pointed out here is that small group instruction should not always be remedial in nature. I think that's important for us to remember. Okay, sometimes we can use that for advancing the concept for students who are ready to take it to another step. So maybe we have the special ed teacher teaching the general content, the content experts working with a subgroup of students that are ready to just take it to another level. Okay, so I think it's really important. It's easy in special ed to get stuck in that remedial phase when we're doing this kind of co-teaching model. Okay, that we've got a small group pulled out that we're doing those remedial skills for. Okay, it's also important to note that those students don't necessarily have to have an IEP. So we may have a small group of students that need maybe just a little bit more prior knowledge development for the activity, so we pull them back. Not all of them have an IEP. We've done some kind of pre-assessment to identify what students know, and so we just pull out a group of kiddos, work with them in that group, and then get them back into the general instruction. Okay. The other big piece of this model for co-teaching that the book talked about, and I love how it kind of laid out a dialogue of what it would look like in the classroom, is team teaching. Okay, this is where we really get to that equally shared responsibility. So the regular ed teacher and the special ed teacher are on the same stage there in terms of teaching what their responsibilities are. Okay, going back and forth, teaching at the same time. They both are confident, right, in the content, and they're both prepared to teach that content. Team teaching really takes a lot of time for planning. Okay. Getting to know each other, developing that team atmosphere between the two teachers. But when you do that, it can be extremely effective for students. So a couple of things that stood out to me in this chapter that I really want to point out to you. Okay, so what does that relationship with the regular ed teacher look like, and how do we improve it in terms of planning? Okay. That's what I really want our takeaway to be here, and the tools that the book gives us to do that. So I think there's two main points that the book makes that are so important. Okay, communication and preparation, and that really is a big piece of co-teaching together. We've got to really communicate well to each other, what our expectations are. We've got to communicate what we think the classroom's going to look like, what our goal is in the student learning. Communicate how we feel like we want to teach. Communication is just important because you're really developing that team atmosphere with that classroom teacher to team teach together. And then preparation is so important. Sometimes in these co-teaching environments, it's going to be a little bit more preparation heavy, of course, than if we were doing it on our own. But there are some great tools in the book on preparation as well, on how to kind of break down a unit plan, for example, or how to break down a lesson. How can we divide up the responsibility as we prepare that taking, again, advantage of those strengths that we talked about, okay, at the beginning, and really prepare the lesson well. One of the examples is on page page 90, figure 5.5. I want you to take a look at that one. The co-teaching planning quick guide. It's just really quick, okay, for daily plans to focus on 3 areas and kind of what the actions are for each person, the general ed teacher and the special ed teacher. So we've got the curriculum standard, okay, so what action does each teacher need to take on that? What's their role? We've got the co-teaching method, okay, and then the instructional methods. So we can just jot down quickly what our expectations are, what we're going to be doing there, okay, to meet the needs of all students, to really have an effective lesson. Again, this is communication. We maybe have already planned out the activity in detail. This just helps us as a reminder. If you look at page 91 on figure 5.6, it's got a great co-teaching planning guide if we want to get into a little bit more detail on things like checking for understanding, the activity, how do we summarize the activity, and what each teacher is going to do, what their role is in that process. This is really important to walk through as we're doing a co-teaching. And I would just, if you're in an environment where you're co-teaching or co-planning, gosh, I just pull these out, duplicate them, use them. This is a great resource. You don't have to create something new to really help you walk through that planning process with your co-teacher. I want to look also at figure 5.3. I think this is really important to go through if you're in the beginning stages of co-teaching or co-planning, or if you haven't done this before, you've been co-teaching with this same teacher maybe for a number of years, and you think, hey, you know what, I think our communication could be better, or I feel like I maybe have expectations that are different than your expectations. How can we improve this working relationship? This is a really good resource to use. So it walks you through these critical questions to discuss with your co-teaching partner. And I love this because it really lays out clearly what your expectations are, what works for you, what doesn't work for you. Okay? And we're all different on these questions. So it's important for us to understand each other in terms of where we stand on this. For example, my tolerance level ends when a student blank. Okay? So where's your line? That can be different from teacher to teacher. And it's important to know where that line is when you're teaching with someone so closely. Okay? To work effectively, I need blank in my classroom. Okay? This gets to positive climate, how we set that up. What are your expectations for the climate of the classroom? Really important for us to know where each other stands on that when we're co-teaching. I could not tolerate a co-teacher who blank. So if we're going to have a great working relationship, this is one thing that's kind of a non-starter for me, okay, in my co-teaching relationship, if a teacher does this, okay. In my classroom, the following are non-negotiables. So where are the lines that you have in terms of student work, student behavior, those kinds of things? Man, having this discussion with someone that you're co-teaching with, co-planning with, or someone whose classroom you're going in and supporting, this can take you a long way in terms of really developing that good, healthy work relationship. It's so important. So I really want you to take a close look at that on page 88 and really think about how that would impact your daily work and what you do with students in your co-planning, co-teaching environment. The other thing that you're going to take a look at during this module, and these are really important for you to look at, and they're going to be related to the activity that you do, are a couple of examples of team teaching and team planning, okay? So I want you to look at these clearly because it really lays out an effective way that this can work. It gives you some really clear examples, okay, of what team teaching looks like. What does that look like in practice when it's done well, okay? The other piece I want you to look at is the team planning. So what are the different roles that individuals can have, and what does that look like when it's working well? When we team plan, it doesn't necessarily mean that we need a tremendous amount of time during the week to team plan, but it means that when we are team planning, we're focused, we've established a good relationship with each other on what that looks like. We know what each other's individual roles are within the team planning. And that's really important for us, from elementary to middle to secondary. Special ed teachers have a role in team teaching and team planning, and we really need to be skilled at that and have the resources at hand to do it well. Okay, so take a look at those two resources and really think about how that impacts your teaching. And then there's a discussion forum for this module where we'll kind of share our experiences, our thoughts on co-teaching and co-planning. And don't hesitate to get in touch if you have any questions.